This isn't my story, it's my uncle's. A bit of backstory: he used to work on the London Underground doing maintenance to the tracks/tunnels etc. Once he went into a tunnel with two other colleagues. They'd stopped to do something and this man said to my uncle like, "Hey, uncle's name, can you show me the way out?" My uncle, thinking it was one of his guys, said, "You know the way out." I think he was so engrossed in his work that he didn't turn around to see this bloke to start with. So this guy says, "I'm so cold," then my uncle said he immediately felt dead cold and the air around him dropped. Not sure what he meant by that. So my uncle turns round and shines a light on him. My uncle said to me this bloke is what he would call a ghost standing there. He was holding a really old/vintage lamp and wearing a really old dirty uniform. He said the feeling he got was so strange, as if he knew this bloke was a ghost. The bloke just kept saying over and over again, "I'm so cold. I'm so cold." My uncle eventually said to this guy, "I don't think you're supposed to be here, mate. Can you see a light anywhere?" And he looked dead at my uncle and said, "Can you help me? I'm so cold." I'm unsure if the colleagues came to see who my uncle was talking to, but one of them tried to approach this bloke thinking it was someone in their team playing a joke, and this bloke just disappeared right in front of their eyes. All of them freaked out and ran. They refused to go back into the tunnel. My uncle and two colleagues refused to go down that tunnel again. Some other colleagues have said they've seen this bloke and he always says how cold he is. My uncle's retired now but says he thinks of this bloke from time to time. It's not scary but unexplainable. When I was 10, I got into a motorcycle accident. I wasn't driving it, I was walking from school when a motorcycle hit me going full speed. I did see the motorcycle come but I froze up and couldn't move. When it had hit me I flew pretty far and remember someone catching me when I fell down. When I got up and looked around, I didn't see anyone and witnesses told the cops I flew at least 6 feet and fell head first on the ground. My head was fine, just had a broken collarbone. Thankfully my parents believed me when I told them. I had a dog growing up that was the smartest dog I've ever met. She was like a human trapped in a dog's body. My brother and I found her wandering around our neighborhood after school and we brought her home. She was beloved. My brother died young. After he died, she would walk slowly in a circle around a plant we had in the living room, letting the leaves that hung down gently rub her back. Every once in a while she would stop and look up at the plant for a moment, like she saw some kind of apparition floating above the plant. She would get a sad look in her eyes and let out a whimper. I'm convinced she was seeing my brother's ghost watching over us. I really loved that dog. Okay, so not something I /*saw /*, but something I was told someone else saw. Here's the story. My ex-GF passed away years ago. Before she passed, me and brother lived together, and my brother had a big pit bull named Max. Max was an awesome dog, and she was a big animal lover, and she knew Max very well. I eventually moved out. He got a GF who had a kid and needed the space. Okay. That's established. Of note, my ex-GF had long blonde hair, was in her 30s, and she was buried in a pink sweater. A few months after she passed, my brother took them all on a vacation, and asked me if I could watch the dog, feed him, etc. I said yes, of course. They kept him crated, and the crate was in his GF's daughter's room, kind of a big basement room. I hung out with the dog and eventually had to leave, so I put him back in his crate. I felt bad, but I had to. Before I left, I looked up the sky and said, "Meg, if you're still around, please keep Max company, he's gonna be lonely." So I go home, my brother comes back, whatever. A few months later, I'm talking to his GF, in her 30s, and we're talking about ghost stuff. She tells me that her house is haunted. I'm like, no way, I'm there all the time, I've never seen anything. She explains to me that it seemed to happen out of nowhere. She hadn't seen anything, but her daughter, around 5 or 6 years old, told her that sometimes when Max is barking or freaking out for whatever reason, her daughter tells her she sees a lady about mommy's age with long blonde hair wearing a pink sweater who calms down the dog. I'm pretty sure I invited a ghost in their house, but I'm damn happy that I did. I wish I could have seen her. When I was a kid, my grandpa was the night shift custodian of a big old school church building. My sister and I used to go with him some nights because they had a big gymnasium-type room with a ton of big exercise balls and stuff, and it was fun to run around. One night while my grandpa was locking up a room, my sister and I heard a noise down the stairs behind us. We looked and there was an old lady leaving the building. She turns, looks at us, does the SH motion with her finger to her lips and leaves. We don't think too much of it at the time. We go to my grandpa and ask him if there was anyone else here tonight, like any meetings, classes, etc., and he says no, it's just us in the entire building. We ask him where the door down the stairs leads and he says, oh, that goes out to the cemetery. My sister and I freaked out. We still talk about it to this day and have the same memory of it. I might have something for this. When I was young, probably around 10 or so, maybe younger. I was at a family wedding. It was late in the evening, so a full moon was out and it was getting darker. Me and my cousin, who's a year younger, were swinging on this big metal gate thing outside the venue. It was on the entrance to a very, very big field. We noticed a guy very far into the field who was just glowing and radiating white. I mean, his skin, clothes, everything. I remember us standing there like WTF. Then we tried to get his attention and shout at him. He stopped, looked in our direction, but he stopped right under the full moon, and pointed up towards the moon whilst staring at us. We were just in shock and confusion pretty much. After about 10 seconds of pointing, he carried on walking across the field and just disappeared behind a swing set. Even till this day I have no idea what that was. I'm hoping it was some costume or something, but sure didn't look like it. I had a dream when I was about 6 years old. It was of an apartment and inside was lots of ghosts and horrible scary creatures. They then dragged me into a room, put me in a bin full of fire. When I turned 10, I moved 200 miles away with my dad to that same apartment from my dream. The fire bin room was my bedroom. That apartment was a literal hell too, as there were loads of drug addicts etc. there. As a kid, there was a camp that had a lean-to and an old plywood caravan against it a long way out in the AUS bush from the town I grew up in. One school holidays, my friends and I went for a bushwalk and stumbled across it. Didn't look like anyone had been there in months, and we looked in the van, nothing much but moldy seats and a built-in table, usual old caravan stuff, so we shut the door because it smelt moldy. As we sat in the shade of the lean-to, we heard the doorknob squeak and start turning. Pretty sure my backpack is still sitting there 35 years later because I dropped it and ran. We all scattered in different directions and met up lower down the road an hour later, and we were all still pale. No way anyone was in that van. No way. Still bothers me to this day. I was on a cruise with a friend. We shared a cabin. Friend was a really loud snorer. He would usually stay awake until I'd fallen asleep, otherwise I'd find it impossible to sleep with the racket he was making. That night, he'd had a few drinks and passed out drunk, snoring loudly. Didn't bother me, as I had my book to read. It's about 2 a.m. and I'm wide awake. Reading my book in bed. I get this feeling that there's something at the foot of the bed. I glance up, and there is this thing. It looks like a person, but translucent and gray, and the features are blurry. A bit like if a person was made of television static. I feel as if it is being inquisitive, like how a young child would watch you do something. I asked it in my head what it wanted, and as I did, it turned and walked across the room to the door. As it did, it disappeared. I didn't feel scared or threatened by it. No idea what it was. I don't drink or take drugs, so it wasn't that, and I was wide awake. Odd. Really odd. I was about 12 at the time. Every year my parents and I would drive from Montreal to Nova Scotia to visit family. Having always gone the Trans-Canada route, we decided to go through the States for a change, so we ended up going SE through Maine and eventually on to NB then NS. I remember we were in a very, very remote area, like hadn't seen a house for a long time. This was before GPS and Google Maps, so there was a growing concern in the vehicle that we might run out of gas. I don't remember the name of the road, but it was a country road that had mountain on the right side, went straight up through dense bush. And on the left it was dense bush, and a steep downhill where I could make out a river at the bottom of the cliff, about a 75 to 100 down the hill. Trees hung over the road, so despite it being a sunny day, the road was shady, with the exception of places where the sun would break through. I heard my dad up front ask Mom, "What the fuck is that up ahead?" As I leaned over to look up down the road, we could all see what looked like a man off in the distance on the side of the road. Too far to see color or anything, just a big dark shape standing there. As we rolled on down the road, this dude or whatever it was crossed the road, both lanes, and I shot you not 3 to 4 steps, once on the other side of the roads, just vanished into the woods. As we got to the spot where he had crossed, Dad slowed right down to look around. Nothing, not a sight of anyone, no trail, nothing. No one knows what they saw, but 30 years later it gets brought up every couple of years and the feelings are mutual, fucking weird and creepy. Once I believe I was on the verge of psychosis from a 10-day bender with blow and handles of vodka and saw a dark-looking figure over my bed, no eyes and no face, just a silhouette moving in jerky motions. Fast forward maybe 2 to 3 years, I get in a near-fatal solo car accident. During the day I see this same shifty silhouette. I was knocked unconscious and remember someone helping undo my seatbelt and helping me stand up. But when the police and ambulance got there, noon was there but me. I still have nightmares about this shit. Giant blue, almond-shaped, front-facing eyes glowing in the dark through a barbed wire fence. I lived on a forest property in a country with no large predatorial animals. This was after huge bushfires, so something that lived in the forest must have been flushed to the outskirts where we lived. Even the insects had gone dead silent and fight or freeze instinct was overwhelming. Local indigenous tribe claim I encountered a bunyip. I have no idea what it was, but I've never been so terrified. Roughly 15 years ago I was in upstate New York with my uncle at our family house. It's pretty quiet and not a lot of people are up there. My uncle and I were outside when it started to downpour, so we went inside. We were looking out the front door together and my uncle was commenting how hard it was raining. This is also pretty rural, so it's mostly pitch black out with only our front house light illuminating the front area. As we are looking out the door, we both see someone on the road sort of speed walking. It's so dark, but their skin was so pale we can see their hands sway as they walked, and then their face as they turned towards our house. All I remember was the face had no eyes. My uncle quickly shut the door and said not to worry, it was probably someone who got out stuck in the rain. I was scared, but he calmed me down. I was little, so I don't remember too much after that other than my uncle keeping watch for a while after that. I forgot about this story until years later when I brought it up to him because I thought maybe it was a dream. His attitude changed when I brought it up and he just said he remembered but didn't want to talk about it. I have never brought it back up to him, and to this day now when I think about it I feel really eerie. Back in college, me and my girlfriend would go back to her parents' old farmhouse and fool around after class. There was never anybody home. One afternoon, I'm standing in her kitchen, thirstily guzzling a post-sex Gatorade. Behind me was a back staircase leading to the second floor of the house. When I finished my drink and turned to leave the room, I noticed a little girl between 7 to 10 years standing on the bottom step. My first thought was, oh crap, why didn't my girlfriend tell me there was a little girl in the house? I really hope she didn't hear what we were up to. But before I could speak, I realized something was off. She was semi-transparent and oddly two-dimensional in a way I can't articulate. Slowly, I came to the realization that I was staring at a ghost. There was nothing inherently frightening about the experience. Knowing I was in the presence of something unexplainable, I did everything in my power not to blink. I stared at her for a good 10 to 15 seconds, taking in every detail I could. She had a red and yellow summer dress on. Long blonde hair that was tied into a couple of those old-timey braids at the end. Black strapped shoes. Overall look gave me a 1940s to 1970s vibe. I live in the countryside, and when I was a kid, every day I used to go check the chickens that we had in a henhouse in the garden. It was around 8 p.m. in the winter, dark and snow everywhere. I put my shoes on and went outside. Everything went as usual, until I saw it. There was somebody standing in front of me in the dark. Or like. I wish it was somebody. That figure was almost 3 meters tall and had red glowing eyes. I told my parents, and until this day nobody believes me. Few years ago I found out the previous owner of our house committed suicide in the same place in our garden years before we moved in. It wasn't what I saw but what I heard. I lived down the street from our town's cemetery. Me and my buddies would walk around on the paths in the cemetery. Every now and then, I'd see a car in the cemetery when walking, but it was more or less always empty. One day, my 3 friends and I were walking up a small hill in the cemetery, and we all heard a knocking sound, exactly like someone knocking on a door. It was just one loud knock 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 feet away from us and then nothing. I looked at my friends, and we all asked if the other made that sound. None of us did and couldn't have. We were in the middle of a road, and the closest tree/grave was 15-20 feet away. We looked around at the houses, and no one was outside that could make the noise. It was creepy and I have no idea how the sound was created. Around 2003 I was walking home from work in the afternoon and just happened to look up on an overcast day. Parallel to my direction a meteor burned up led by a bright burning and leaving black smoke across the whole sky. It made a low-pitched loud rumbling across the whole sky for the 3 seconds it took to travel that far. Before YouTube no one would have believed me, much less heard of anyone who saw it. In hindsight it was wicked cool to see. At the time, I thought I was going to die. I had seen meteor showers. I had never seen one that low, or with any volume. During my time working on offshore oil rigs, I had an experience I'll never forget. The rigs are powered by massive generators, each roughly the size of a small house. One day, a technician skipped the lockout-tagout procedure while investigating voltage drops on the pump deck. A supervisor came by, noticed the 3rd generator was offline, and decided to switch it back on. I happened to be in the room, looking for a replacement pump sensor, when I heard the generator kick in. Boom! Pop zap! In an instant, I watched as a person was engulfed, turned to plasma, then carbonized. The sound and smell, those are impossible to forget. When I was about 7 to 8 I had a rope swing in my backyard. I was obsessed with it and would play on it for hours. One day just like any other, I was swinging on it, and out the corner of my eye I spotted an animal. At first I thought it was a squirrel, but as I turned to look at it, it was much bigger and darker than a squirrel. So I figured it was a stray cat. But as I watched it walk across the yard, it wasn't a cat. It was something I had never seen before. It was all black, had the head of a badger but the body of a squirrel. It was about 2 feet in length and the height of a small dog. I got a little spooked cause I figured it was a rabid animal, so I got off the swing and backed away. That's when, in all seriousness, I watched this mystery animal run towards the fence and run right through it. Leaving to hole or damage to the fence, it just phased right through. I sat in awe for a good 3 minutes before I slowly walked inside. I'm not typically one to believe in the supernatural, but something happened to me a few years ago that I still can't explain. Even thinking about it now gives me chills, and I've often wondered if someone out there might have experienced something similar. Here's my story. I was on a road trip with a couple of friends, headed to a small town known for its scenic mountains and forests. We were planning to camp out in a clearing not far off the main trail to watch the stars and just get away from city life for a few days. Everything was going well. We reached the clearing just before dusk, set up our tents, and got a fire going. The atmosphere was just perfect, and we felt completely isolated from the rest of the world, which was exactly what we wanted. Around midnight, the conversation started winding down, and the forest was completely quiet except for the occasional crackle of our fire. We were starting to get sleepy when I suddenly heard what sounded like faint, distant music. I thought maybe I was imagining it, but I noticed my friend looking around too. I asked him, "Do you hear that?" He nodded, looking just as confused as I felt. We strained our ears, trying to place the sound, and realized it was coming from deeper in the forest, beyond where our firelight could reach. It was a strange, melodic humming, almost like a lullaby. The weird part was how it seemed to echo around us as though we were in a large, hollow room. We thought maybe some other campers had brought a radio or something, but the music didn't sound modern or even like any genre I'd ever heard. It was haunting and beautiful, yet it had this deeply unsettling quality. We debated investigating but ultimately decided against it. It was late, we were in an unfamiliar forest, and we didn't have a strong enough light to make it far. So, we sat there, listening to the eerie music, hoping it would stop. But it didn't. It kept going, growing louder, almost like it was getting closer, but we still couldn't see anything beyond the firelight. Then something really bizarre happened. All at once, the fire suddenly dimmed, and the whole clearing felt cold, like someone had sucked all the warmth out of the air. The music was clearer now, and it was almost as if it was coming from all directions. My friend whispered, "I think we should go back to the car." He didn't have to tell me twice. We quickly grabbed our essentials, left the rest, and started moving back toward the Travi scene.